Alrighty. So, I'm going to show you how I prep and make my lasagna sauce. I also use it for spaghetti, and I use it for pizza sauce as well. So this is usually what I do when I get hamburger meat. I get it in bulk, and then I take a quart-sized bag and I separate it out, date it, flatten it out like this. See, it's a real nice little thin flat. And then I put it in the freezer, and they stack easy. They're easy to pull out, and they don't take that long to thaw either. So we have our hamburger meat. It calls for 3/4, but we're going to go ahead with the full. This is closer to a pound. That's what I usually do anyway. We have the Italian sausage, sweet, which is actually kind of important for the taste. And this is what I use when it comes to that. I've got my sugar, got my minced onions, black pepper, basil, Italian seasoning, fennel seed, and then we have our parsley right here. It's store-bought because I have yet to get my parsley going. And then we have our garlic right here. I had to write down my amounts over here. I always have to double check that because I can't always keep them all up in my mind. But what we're going to start with is the meat itself. And I have a pan over on the stove right now, just sitting there waiting. What I'm going to do is go ahead and get ourselves 2 garlic cloves, which after peeling this thing, getting that outermost layer gone, we'll start to see some cloves. So for those of you who are new to using garlic cloves, each one of these little things that pops off like that, that's a clove. So you need 2 of those for the recipe. And they vary in shapes and sizes. I usually try and go for a decent sized one inside the whole mass, and then a smaller one, just so it's not a little overwhelming. Then you have to break these off and continue to peel and try and get it all off of there, which can take a little bit of time. But with some trial and error, you eventually get there. Just kind of pressing it can help break that outer layer, get it to loosen from the rest of it. And this one's not wanting to be easy for me. You can also grab it from the little bottom here and get most of it off that way. I wanted to try and do this video yesterday, but I found out that all of my garlic had gone bad. Usually you can store it out in like a little basket. You don't want to store it in the fridge. Just store it in a little basket out with the onions, and it'll last for quite some time, but eventually, like all things, they go bad. Alright, so this is the end clove. It's smooth, it doesn't have any anything like this, you know, on it. And now we do the other one. Which this one obviously looks like it's going to be a lot nicer, and just have it all pretty much come right off. Now, granted, I didn't show it on the video, but I did wash my hands before handling the food, which is very important, obviously. Hygiene and all that. Alright, so now we got our second clove. Okay, and I like to usually clean stuff up as we go. You probably saw, possibly, I have some gloves. That's actually for when I go to do the meat, which you'll see here in a minute. It's just a personal preference, obviously. People don't have to do it that way, but I prefer to when it comes to using the gloves, which you'll see later. I usually like to cut off both of the ends, get all that extra stuff off, and I just kind of, I don't know, cut it up into as small pieces as I can. Now, one thing to note, if you're using wood when cutting anything, especially garlic, onions, things that you use for flavor, it seeps into your the wood, and I have yet to find a way to really sanitize and get that out, since I really only use this mostly for the garlic and onion things. It doesn't really bother me too much to have it do that, but plastic can be usually your better bet for cutting boards when it comes to sanitizing and not having flavor from previous things get into other things. I'm doing a really poor job of it this time cutting. I just kind of keep cutting and pushing it together, and then cut again until it's all like little bitty pieces. Because for as big as the amount that's made, you still want to get the garlic to kind of go spread throughout it as much as possible. To say, for the knives that I have, my brother got me a new knife set. It's KitchenAid. Came with a sharpener in the block, which is nice. My old one had a sharpener, but it was one of those long steel rods. And it was a cheaper knife set. I'm actually very happy with the knife set that he got me for Christmas, so. Of course, I don't know how expensive it was. I do know it had to have been pricier than the one I got, which had been about $50, so. But these work really nice, and every time I go to put my knives away after I wash them, I just throw it on the little sharpener thing, and that helps keep them sharp all the time. So there's about 2 cloves worth of garlic right there. And I'm just going to come over to my pan, which you'll see here soon, and dump that in there. In fact, I'll go ahead and move you over there right now. Alright, so, as you can see, I got the garlic in there right now. Then it calls for, let's see, a little reference sheet here. Calls for 1/2 cup minced onion. So I'm gonna go through here and look at my little cups. This is actually a 1 cup, but it's got a little half marker inside it, which I really liked. So we'll fill this up until we get to that half cup marker. Okay, pour that in there. So we got our seasonings for that. Now this is where the gloves come in. When it comes to handling the meat, especially since I have the little munchkin usually running around needing something, I like to put gloves on when handling the meat so that it's a lot easier to just drop what I'm doing, take the gloves off. I don't have raw meat on my hands. I can go deal with what he needs. Also, when it comes to dealing with all of this, I prefer to try and mix it up before I start cooking it. Make sure that the onions and the garlic get spread out evenly and that the sausage and meat are mixed together pretty well. Also, it helps buffer from the cold. I don't know about anybody else, but the cold kind of tends to make my hands hurt, and the gloves help buffer that. As you can see, I have small hands. This is a one size fits all, you know, which means that they have obviously not met me, because just about any glove size I try that's one size fits all is always way too big. I have yet to be able to find some place that sells the extra small size cheap. But yeah, I just use sterile, non-powdered gloves because I don't want the powder affecting the food. And does pretty good for what I need it. And then I also, since I get a big old box of it, have plenty of gloves for cleaning, using products that I may not want to touch my skin, things like that. So I get multiple uses out of these things. Now, granted, you could probably cut these and get all this, this, whatever you want to call it, the skin that they put these in. Might even be quicker, I don't know. I just, I go ahead and do it this way to lower on dish consumption. I like to avoid dirtying dishes if I don't have to. Even if I have a dishwasher. Just one less thing that needs to be clean. The other thing that using these gloves saves is it doesn't get up, the meat doesn't get up under my nails when I do this, which can be such a real pain to try and clean off. So yeah, alright, so we got all the meat in there now. So what I usually do is I just go in and mix it up like this. Get the onions spread throughout the meat, garlic spread throughout it. Usually I like to let the meat sit out a little longer than I did today, because even with the gloves on, you can still feel that chill from being in the fridge. which I personally don't like. It makes my hands hurt after a while. And then something that makes it a little easier when cooking it, because this tends to be a little bit of a pain to try and keep small and stuff while you're cooking it, is I like to try and just separate it as much as I can into smaller portions. It helps a little bit. I have tendonitis in my shoulders, both of them. So after a while of, trying to separate the meat while it's cooking, it can really make my shoulders sore. So here we go. Alright, that is done. Make sure we try and get all these little bits off of the gloves as much as possible. Alright, now we can turn it on. You can cook this at whatever speed you want. I try to cook it a little slow at the beginning because it's a lot easier to separate when it's like this, but it doesn't stay separated until it starts to actually cook, so it's a process. Anyway, we'll let that get started and go set all of our other seasonings up in the bowls. Okay, so I went ahead and opened up the cans of sauce that we're going to end up using. We have 2 of the 6-ounce no salt added Hunt's paste. There you go. I do the no salt added since we add salt to the recipe, since it calls for it. But you could probably use it with salt. I mean, it's going to be your own preference. This is the no salt added sauce. And the no salt added crushed tomatoes. So, now we're going to pull out our base, or parsley here. This is the curly parsley, is what I got. I bought it from the store since I don't have any growing right now. I actually got this whole bunch for $1 at Albertsons, and it looks pretty good. So I was a bit surprised there. Obviously, I only need 3 tablespoons of parsley, so I really don't need all this. But still, I'm gonna try and separate a decent amount out and put the rest away for later if I need parsley. Okay, so just put this off to the side. Oh, we got some icky parsley there. I'm going to rinse it since we do have some dead growth on here. Make sure we get just some clean, fresh herbs here. Okay, so there we go. Now there's different types of parsley. There's Italian and the curly, and I think there's one other. I just cannot remember the name right now. Usually I think recipes like this are expecting the Italian parsley, but I just went with curly because that's what I've always had. That's what I usually grow. It works out just fine. So with this, I just kind of cut up. I usually try and focus mostly on the leaves instead of the stems. That right there should be plenty. That's not 3 tablespoons worth. I don't know what it is. And then I just kind of cut it up as small as I'm able. Basically the same way I did the others. And it's probably good to use a different knife than this type. I have yet to really learn which knives are good for which purposes yet. That's something I plan on learning eventually. It just has not been necessarily at the top of my list. Now see, the recipe, it only really calls for fresh parsley, and then it calls for the cloves of garlic. So really, those are the only 2 real fresh ingredients that you're using. The reason I kind of put that in quotations is garlic can sit for weeks and still be good. So technically, it's not fresh. At least in my book. You know, if it's been sitting there for weeks and then you use it, it's not fresh anymore. But see here, looks like I'm there we go. Parsley, on the other hand, it's a little bit fresher, but who knows when they took it off the plant and how long it's been sitting in the store. So, it says here 3 tablespoons parsley, so here's our tablespoon. And I just kind of stuff it in there. I like to put it in a separate bowl because it's wet. I'll measure all my other ingredients out into another bowl, which not only is it the fact that it's wet, but I'm a lot more limited on fresh herbs than I am the dried herbs. So if I put it in a separate bowl after measuring it out, then do the others, if I mess up on the others, I'm still okay. So yeah, we still have plenty left. In fact, with the lasagna recipe, it calls for 4 total. The last one goes into the ricotta cheese. And so yeah, we would have had plenty for all of it. So, I'm not making lasagna right now, so we don't really need it. Alright, so we have our parsley down. Go ahead and rinse this out. And dry it. That way if we need to use it again for any of the others, we won't get a whole bunch of herbs stuck to it. So, next we need a tablespoon of salt, which I forgot to grab my salt over here. tablespoon of salt. This is what I usually use, just, you know, regular old salt. You'll probably substitute with Himalayan, maybe? I'm not sure. I know it's supposed to be healthier than the iodized salt, but I haven't looked into possibilities with cooking with it, so we got a tablespoon of salt right there. Let's see, we need 2 tablespoons of white sugar. And give me just a second. I had to pause so I could let the dog out. So, anyway, here's what I usually keep my sugar in. I'm using white granulated sugar, that's why I store it in this. I actually have a more organic sugar made out of dehydrated sugarcane juice. At least it says it's organic these days. They'll put organic on just about anything just so they can add $2 to the price. But the sugar that I get is considered more of a sweetener, and it's low on calories and I think cholesterol or something like that. It was suggested to me to try by my Aunt Teresa. She uses it. She's a very healthy woman, so I trust her knowing what's better to go with. So let's see here. We did the 2 tablespoons of white sugar. That's what we just did. Now we need 1.5 teaspoon of dried basil leaves. Now, since I'm going to be growing my own basil, I am going to try and start using that. Once I get that going. So let's see here. 1.5, so we need three of these because it's a half. So 1, 2, 3. Then we need 1/2 teaspoon of the fennel seeds. So, there we go. And 1 teaspoon, so 1 teaspoon of the Italian seasoning. Okay, 1 and 2 makes 1 teaspoon. If I put this on there, don't it? Okay, now we need 1/4 teaspoon pepper. I can't handle very spicy foods, so I find ketchup spicy. If that kind of puts it into perspective for you. So, if you're like me, you don't have to worry about that black pepper. It doesn't really make it spicy. So, we've got all of those mixed together. Now, I like to kind of take a fork and just mix it all together. The sugar and salt really doesn't mix with it too well because they're smaller, so they always seep down to the bottom. But I like to try and give it as much of a mix as I can. So, there's that. Now, the tomato paste. If I can find my spatula here. Your 1/2 cup water, which is what's in here, is 1/2 cup. It goes with your tomato paste. The reason is you kind of need to mix the water with the paste to get it to really blend well with the others. So I usually get my little itty bitty spatula, which just a tad too big to begin with. I had to actually cut along the edge here because it kept trying to catch on the cans. But use it to get all of this out. Which can be a little bit of a pain. But if you just keep trying, you get it eventually. And then we have our little fork from before. So we'll just use that again. Like I said, I like to try and avoid using up tons of dishes. So if it's safe to use from one end to another, I usually do so. And keep this in there so that we can get the other stuff. And then just very carefully, because if you start doing it, you know, too much or too fast, you'll slosh the water all over the place. So just real carefully, a little bit at a time, start getting that to mix together. You can use a whisk instead. There's times where I just feel like using a whisk because it goes by a little faster. But today we'll just use a fork. Works just as well. Alright. So there's our tomato paste. That's all set and ready. So technically everything here that we have set up now, that's going to go into our meat once we get done cooking it, which we need to go back and check. Alright, here's the meat. Here's what it's been doing while we were over there messing with that. Now it's just a matter of trying to get it as fine as you can. The reason that is, especially since, you know, this is for lasagna, you want the sauce to be not so chunky, I guess is the best way to put it. That way it spreads out very well when you're doing your layers. Also, since I use this for spaghetti and for pizza sauce, having it pretty fine is a lot more helpful. Especially with the pizza. Spaghetti, it doesn't really hurt having bigger chunks of meat because it's spaghetti. But it can be a real pain to separate because of that sausage in there. So I'm going to work on this. I'm going to put you guys on pause so that you don't have to sit there throughout the whole video going, okay, when's it done? And I will bring you back once we start moving on to the next step. Alright, we're back. Now, as you can see, it's pretty much ground up. I still have some kind of big chunks in here. Short of putting it in, say, a blender or something, it's really hard to avoid that. I don't know if the video will show you. There's some grease in there. When I cook just regular hamburger meat, and just regular ground hamburger meat, no spices, I'll actually go and take it to the sink and strain it to get as much of the grease out of there as possible. But with this, since we're cooking in the seasoning and we have the onion and the garlic in there, I don't do that. So it's a little greasy because of the sausage. I mean, I use lean meat for the hamburger meat, but sausage is always going to be a little greasy, so. Anyway, that's fully cooked. So, now what we do is we come over and we start adding the tomato sauce. So I just pour the can straight in here. that turning the spatula so you get the corner end really helps get in that crevice. It doesn't really matter what order you pour it in here. I mean, it's all going in there. It's all doing the same thing. You're going to mix it up. Now, if you notice, I do not add any water. You've already added a water to the paste. And if you were to add any more water, especially without rinsing the meat, it's going to be kind of soupy. So, which you don't want. Okay, here's our paste. Let's put that right there. Then we have our seasoning, our parsley, and our other little mixture here. So go ahead and dump the parsley in there. And the rest of our seasoning. So you mix that all up. Try and make sure it gets real evened out. See, as you can see, that grease really kind of just waters it down just a little bit. That's not a problem because we're going to be cooking it. It's going to thicken up. You cook it for about an hour and a half. So you can cook it longer if you want the herbs to cook into it even longer than that, or if you want it to thicken up even more. But now that we got this all mixed up real nice. Okay, we're going to go and get the lid. Okay, so go ahead and stir it up a little bit more. Alright, put the lid on there. I kind of like to let it get up to a boil and then put it down to simmer, and then we let it cook for an hour. So go ahead and set this for an hour and a half. There we go. And that's that for now. I'm gonna let that cook, and then I will be back and I will show you how I divvy it up and store it for later. Alright, it has been an hour and a half. I got it up to a boil, and then I put it on low, and it's cooked. And of course it hasn't really thickened up because it had the lid on it the whole time. But the point of making it cook for the hour and a half is to let those spices really get into the sauce and for the flavor to grow. So, stir that up just a little bit. Now, normally at this point, when I'm making lasagna, I of course turn the stove off because this is done. But I would just go straight into making lasagna. However, we're going to be separating this into bags for later use. So we're going to let it cool off, since it is tomato sauce and highly acidic, it can sit here for, you know, however long it takes to cool off to go into Ziploc baggies and not really worry about it becoming unsafe, if you will. So we're gonna let this sit, let it cool off, and then we'll move on to putting it in bags. I am going to leave a portion separate because I plan on doing spaghetti tonight, and yeah, we'll go from there. So okay, so we're back. I believe that it has cooled enough. Now I'm starting with 4 bags. I like to pre-label them. That's why I only started with 4. So I don't label more than I need. But it's good to label them so that you know how old it is. Because even being in the freezer, eventually it can go bad if not used soon enough. And it's harder to label them after you've filled them. So that would be why I usually do it beforehand. So I just basically put a few spoonfuls in, kind of estimate in my head about how much would be needed when it's thawed out. Make sure I try and get as much of the air out as possible. And then I lay it flat so that it will basically resemble the meat packets, if you look at it like that. That way they'll lay flat inside the freezer. And you kind of have to work with it, and you'll probably have to work with it when you put it in the freezer to make sure it lays flat. But you'll get it. So we just keep taking our bags and carefully scooping up the spaghetti sauce and adding it to there. And of course you can use your own size bags, you know, whatever size you want. I think there are smaller size pint, I want to say. And say for instance you're single, you know, it's just you're the only person you got to really worry about. You can do the pint size for a single serving and be able to have it, and yeah, be able to go and warm some up and have a full spaghetti meal, or do a little personal pan pizza or whatever, and not have to deal with all the mess of cooking every night, except for the noodles, obviously. But with it being me and baby most of the time, it's a lot easier to do them in these increments. Usually I have leftover even after the fact, so I end up putting leftovers in the fridge and I'll eat spaghetti again for another night or whatever. But all in all, it's a pretty decent system. It works, and it saves food in the long run, and I'd say money as well. And if you're a parent, then you know there's always those days you're not going to want to cook. You've been tired, you had to run after the kids all day, all that kind of stuff. It's nice to be able to just get a Ziploc baggie out of the freezer, warm it up however you want to, you know. You can either put it in the microwave and just heat it up that way, which I really wouldn't necessarily recommend. I mean, you can, but I don't know about the plastic bags heating and mixing with the food. They won't melt, but I don't know chemical wise, you know, how that would work, what you're risking. You could take it and put it in a hot bowl of water and let it thaw that way. Then add it to whatever you're going to add it to, and then heat it up some more. Just put in a sink full of water, let it thaw over time, and then heat it up. I mean, there's numerous ways you could just go about doing it. It just depends on your preference, really. So we're gonna leave that bit right there for me and the little man. We're gonna just do spaghetti tonight. That'll be plenty. When I do actually make lasagna, what I have done in the past is I'll half the entire recipe and make it in a smaller dish. I want to say it's a 13 by 9 or something like that. Let me see here. A 8 by 8. I use an 8 by 8 casserole pan. And so I have the entire lasagna recipe. Use what meat it takes. Do the whole thing. I put it in the oven, cook it, and then I take what's left of the sauce and use it for spaghetti for that night. Because if you make your lasagna, you know, you do all the directions and let it cook, and once you take it out, you let it cool off a bit, then cover it in foil and put it in the fridge. And then the next night, when you heat it up, it's more solid and firm, because when you eat it right after making it, it's kind of messy. It moves all over the place. It's a big glomp, you know, mess. If you like it to be a little bit more firm and a little bit more structured, so you're actually taking out lasagna slices, then putting it in the fridge and then eating it the next day would be the more preferred way to do it. And for me, that basically takes care of 2 meal nights. So, yeah. But that is how I do my my sauce. So hopefully that helps you out. If not, oh well. Hope you enjoyed.